expand that and thinks there can be a durable, lasting solution with a sovereign Ukraine, and that Russia will accept that, is deluding themselves.
And a reminder, you can catch that full interview in the BBC's Ukraine cast on BBC Sounds. Well, joining me now are from Brussels, Rosa Balfour, Director of Carnegie Europe, and from Ukraine, Michael Bociurkiw, former spokesman for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good to see you both. Thank you for being with us. Michael, I'll start with you, if I may. Does this, as the US delegation suggests, mean that peace is on the way for Ukraine?
It doesn't feel like it at this moment. I can tell you that as we speak, 1/3 of Ukraine is under air raid siren alerts. We were under one just a few minutes ago here in Odessa due to Russian drones headed this way. So I am wondering today in the talks whether the American side even bothered to demand from the Russians to stop sending rockets and drones this way. Doesn't sound like it. The other thing I have to say is that the American side today, and this is talking to you from my experience with the OSCE, sitting across the table from many diplomats, including Russians, is the U.S. side sounded more like a cheerleading squad for Mr. Trump. They said a few times the only leader in the world that can make this happen, that can make peace happen in Ukraine. And one more thing, when we're talking about peace here, you also have to wonder whether the Americans bothered to tell the Russians to cut their friendships with Tehran and with Pyongyang, two countries that are arch enemies of the United States.
Well, let's pick up on that with you, if I can, please, Rosa, because we're talking about these conversations between the US and Russia, but there are many more countries who have been involved in the Ukraine-Russia conflict since it broke out. Surely the US is just one of those, and Ukraine can continue without them.
So the assessment in terms of financial and military aid is that, and with the commitments already made by the United States, thanks to the Biden administration, is that Ukrainians can continue fighting off the Russian aggression for the rest of the year, perhaps towards the end of the year. Perhaps that also takes into account a certain degree of wishful thinking. But perhaps until the summer or the early autumn. But the bottom line is that there needs to be some kind of change of the military situation on the ground. And this has been, by and large, the expectation of all sides. What was perhaps less expected is that this process would start with a bilateral call between Trump and Putin, which actually means that these two individuals have been shaping the way in which the talks have started. To me, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that this really is a triumph for Russia, that Putin managed to shape the way in which the conversation would start. Russia manages to get a seat at the table with the great power, the United States, and without all the other smaller powers that are involved in supporting Ukraine. The normalization of relations between the US and Russia starts before any conversation about what kind of peace agreements can be reached, what kind of ceasefire can be reached in Ukraine. So all the indications are that really it's Russia that is setting the agenda and Trump that is being heavily influenced.
Well, actually, Michael, that is an important point, because we talk about Ukraine and how much longer Ukraine can cope, but Russia also has depleted forces, depleted troops, depleted resources. It needs this conflict to end soon as well.
One would think, especially due to the human losses, but I don't know of a Mr. Putin who ever cared about loss of his own citizens. The big difference here between Russia and the rest of Europe and Ukraine is their economy is very, very much on a wartime footing. What the UK, Canadian, and European economies should have been on a long time ago. I agree with our colleague that Ukraine can probably keep on going for quite some time. However, the United States, if it wanted to, perhaps to appease Russia, could pull the plug right away. And what I mean by that is they could stop sharing intelligence with the Ukrainians. And a big worry for us here is that they could disable the Patriot missile defense system, which would leave Odessa, the ports, all the other Ukrainian cities very, very exposed. So That is why I keep on saying is that I think Mr. Zelensky, unfortunately, has very little leverage because we know how transactional the Trump administration is. And if Trump is very, very desperate for a foreign affairs win, he hasn't won in North Korea, in Afghanistan, he's making a mess of the Middle East. So he could attempt something like that.
And Rosa Balfour, if I can just briefly, what does this mean for US relations with NATO?
Well, I mean, that is the big problem for Europeans, because here we have Russia's aggression in Ukraine, Russia conducting a hybrid warfare against Europe, and all the indications are that the US is not willing to stick to its NATO commitments and provide security guarantees to NATO members, let alone to Ukraine. These are all the indications that we're getting. I have to say, though, we do need to be clear. You know, the first thing is that we have no details about the peace agreement or a ceasefire. We have plenty of quite cacophonous voices coming out of the United States. At the moment, it looks like the person shaping what this will look like is Trump, and those around him are trying to guess what it is that he would want to see with respect to Ukraine and with respect to Europe.
Okay, Rosa Balfour from Carnegie Europe and Michael Bociurkiw from the OSCE, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Still to come here on The World Today. An update on the health of the Pope, who's said to be suffering from double pneumonia, will be